Hey everybody, this is Laird of Garskadden, and sorry again for taking such a long time to make another YouTube video. Our roommate just moved out and took his wireless router with him and didn't tell anybody until the internet's gone. So we had to wait like several weeks before our new roommate could come in with his wireless router. We didn't want to spend $37 on it. Pretty funny. But now we have YouTube, and I have my iMac, and I'm ready to make YouTube videos once more. One more thing here in America, our colleges have just let out for the spring, and that means, hey, our college is over. I just finished my directed studies in history on the Armenian Genocide. It's called The History and Denial of the Armenian Genocide. This is my 30-page paper. It's ridiculous. And, yeah, read about 12 books this semester to do this. It was really brutal. I got an A. Pretty awesome. Anyway, I figure since I just wrote this bloody thing, that for this Armenian Genocide Proof 2 video, I'm just going to read from the paper that I wrote. Okay. Here you go. I hope you find this very informative, by the way. It's pretty interesting. Next, it is essential to cover the topic of the confiscation of Armenian property, officially known as the temporary law of expropriation and confiscation. The first set of regulations appeared May 30th, 1915. Quote, the deported Armenians were to be provided for en route and at their final destination through an existing government fund for refugees. In the deportees' new location, the government would provide land, housing, agricultural equipment, seed grain, and other necessary supplies. The deportees were to be compensated for property and valuables left behind. Abandoned property was to be registered and distributed to incoming refugees. End quote. The remaining production facilities, such as orchards, factories, storefronts, and inns, were to be sold by way of auction or rental equivalent. On June 10, 1915, a supplementary law was added that contained additional instructions as to how to facilitate this process, and on September 26, 1915, another temporary law was promulgated to provide for the handling of debts, credits, and assets of the deportees. Noteworthy was the voice of Senator Ahmed Riza during this time, who voiced his opposition to these laws during the September 21st, October 4th, 1915 session of the Senate. First of all, he pleaded with the government to allow the Armenian women, children, and old people to return to their residences, at least for the oncoming winter. He also stated that the law was unconstitutional, that it violated Article 16 because the law was announced 2 days before the convening of the Parliament. He stated, quote, it is also inimical to the principles of law and justice. This law must therefore pass through the Parliament and go into effect only after the end of the war. Hence, on the basis of Article 53 of the Constitution, I request the change as proposed in the bill before us. So basically, this law that was supposed to confiscate all the property of the Armenians, it was passed, it was put into effect like 2 days before the Parliament could even see it. What does that tell you? That's unconstitutional, according to the Ottomans. In the November 30th, December 13th, 1915 session, Riza again voiced his opposition. Quote, it is unlawful to designate the Armenian assets and properties as abandoned goods. For the Armenians, their proprietors, did not abandon their properties voluntarily. They were forcibly, compulsively removed from their domiciles and exiled. Now the government, through its officials, is selling their goods. Nobody can sell my property if I am unwilling to sell it. Article 21 of the Constitution forbids it. If we are a constitutional regime functioning in accordance with constitutional law, we can't do this. This is atrocious. Grab my arm, eject me from my village, then sell my goods and properties. Such a thing can never be permissible. Neither the conscience of the Ottomans nor the law can allow it. End quote. Despite Riza's frequent attempts to address the explicit illegality of this law. The other senators, as well as Interior Minister Talat Pasha himself, who threatened to initiate even more severe measures against the Armenians, continued to pressure him into silence. In this way, the temporary law on abandoned goods was left intact. After his analysis of Ottoman archives, historian Taner Akçam writes, quote, "Yet, despite the dozens of documents outlining the use of Armenian property, there is not a single piece of evidence showing that any compensation was actually paid to any deportee. This absence provides a strong argument for the genocidal intent of the Ottoman government. There is also no evidence that any parcel of land was given to the deportees at their final destination, nor any goods. Had the intention been, as stated, to resettle the Armenians elsewhere, proof of this would exist in the archival documentation." End quote. Akçam goes on to describe the 5 waves, alongside several pieces of evidence that describe examples for each, of how the Ottoman government spent the revenues obtained by confiscation of Armenian goods, despite the statement that all properties would be returned to the Armenians. Now, this next part, these 5 things, I'm going to have to make another video just describing these 5 things, because it's really interesting how the Ottoman government spent the money that they got from the Armenian property that they said they would give back but didn't. That's going to be another video in the future, probably my next video. 1. To extend the Muslim bourgeoisie. 2. To provide the needs of new immigrants. 3. To meet the needs of the military. 4. To cover the expense of the deportations. And 5. To cover other state needs. The Armenians were never compensated for the property that was taken from them, and they did not receive food, water, or the promised housing in Syria. In fact, there is a document that says, "Since the maintenance of the Armenians deported from Zaytun cannot be met by the state alone, they must provide their own sustenance." End quote. The reasoning behind this is fairly clear. It was understood that the Armenians would either be expelled or killed, so there was no need for any of these things. Now, on a slightly different note, basically, Turkey stole all that money from the Armenians, and stole all their property, and did not give it back. And all their, never mind the Armenians who were killed, they stole all that money, and it was official policy, and it was never returned. Now, I say that Turkey should give monetary reparations to Armenia at least because of this. They never gave back all the money they took from the Armenians, or the property that they took from them. So at least pay them back for that. I think that giving back land is just going to cause more trouble than it's worth, although that would be ethical. It's just going to create more trouble. But definitely, you got to give back the money, okay? That's wrong to not pay that back in all that time. Moving along. One interesting note is that both the temporary law on deportations and the temporary law of expropriation and confiscation specifically excluded Muslims and were deliberately targeting Armenians. In a debate on April 3rd, 1924, Deputy Musa Kazim objected to Article 2 of a draft fiscal bill that used the phrase, quote, "a political body of people," which was targeting non-Muslims. He said that a person's guilt should be determined by a court of law and that the phrase needed to be removed. In response, Finance Minister Hassan Fehmi, in charge of preparing the bill in question, stated that it was risky to use the phrase non-Muslim. But the commission had secretly made a deal with the finance minister that the Muslims would be excluded from the application of this law. To support this, he explained that the same procedure had been adopted when the September 13th, 26th, 1915 temporary law on expropriation and confiscation was instituted. Quote, "Not a single Muslim's goods were liquidated. You can establish these facts by examining the old records of the secret deliberations. The parliament at that time secretly secured reassurances from the finance minister that the law would not apply to Muslims who had fled as a result of war. Only after registering this assurance did we proclaim to the world that law. Presently we are repeating this procedure. With this response," that's unquote, "with this response the deputy withdrew his motion and the bill was approved."